Welcome to the Future of Structures podcast, where we talk to the experts who are evolving our buildings for tomorrow. And here is your host, Adam Jones.
Today we are speaking with Michael Rowe, who is a director at Ethos Urban, and they are leading consultancy in urban planning. So Michael is a very forward-thinking urban planner and an expert at what he does. So in the conversation we talk about the fundamentals of urban planning to make thriving cities. So this is a very basic conversation. If you're an urban planner, some of my questions come from a place of ignorance. How to best cater for the growing cities, how technology can influence the planning process and speeding up the approval process, and how planning has evolved over the decades. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. It was great speaking to Michael. He has a wealth of knowledge in planning. Without any further ado, here is Michael Rowe.
Yes, I went the part of the UNSW planning degree in New South Wales, which is where I studied as an undergrad, have a year's student program within it. And all the companies, generally consultancies and public, will go out and recruit students out of that process. And so I was fortunate where I am now at Ethos Urban. Previously it was called JBA in New South Wales. And I signed up for their kind of student year, and 12 years on, I'm still here. So I went straight into a workplace that I really loved and projects I was enjoying, and the rest is history.
Yeah, cool. So at the fundamental level, what do urban planners actually do, and problems they solve for I guess our cities?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question. And what does an urban planner actually do? I think ultimately we're shaping the built form in order to, and I guess urban environments in order to idealistically create better environments for people to live and work and recreate in. And that looks really different for different types of planners and the kind of work that they do. I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that ultimately we can shape it, but we can't control it. There's all the other factors that, mark it, and those other political layers that will probably have greater determinative weight on things, but we have a hand in trying to lead it in the right direction.
And was there always urban planners, or is it a relatively new thing? So I know some of our cities weren't maybe planned the best.
Yeah, look, Sydney's a good example of something that's grown organically, and there are definitely principles that go in, that were there, but how were they whether they weren't front and centre to the process. And so, in using Sydney as an example, some of those Macquarie towns on the fringe of the city and things were actually quite well planned, whereas a lot of the more urban areas just happened over time. But the interesting thing, I think, as we observe about planning and how input is, the areas that are most desirable in Sydney today, whether it's in Surrey Hills or Paddington, and that were organic areas that grew and were considered slums and everyone wanted to demolish, are now the areas that people want to live in. So you can plan things and control things, but ultimately sometimes it's the unplanned that makes cities interesting and desirable.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I read in one of the articles you wrote how it's important, I guess, there's a lot of changes that need to happen from like the old style of urban planning and to, I guess, get with the times now. So what is like the kind of the old methodology of urban planning and the old school way of doing things?
Yeah, look, I think the article you're referring to is in terms of how technology is changing planning, is that as planners we're very good at writing long reports and lots of written information, and you look at planning reports, they're usually quite inaccessible documents. And so it's actually thinking about using technology and the resources that are already there, and architects are using and urban designers are using to use more visual tools to actually help people understand and communicate ideas of planning in a more accessible way for obviously for the public, which is really important, but also for key stakeholders and politicians and all those people that are involved in a process. And unfortunately, it also, and you'd like to think this wasn't the case, but very often, like, planners don't actually know how to read plans that well, or those skills that you'd think would be quite core don't necessarily can't be given as assumed. And so the better we can communicate and help everybody in the process understand, I think the better opportunities for good outcomes.
And some criticism the whole process gets sometimes is how long it takes for an approval, something to actually get going. Why is this the case?
Look, it's easy, especially as a consultant, you can point fingers at this person took too long or that. And certainly, and I look at this from a New South Wales frame of reference, but in talking with our other officers, often the issues here are the same in the other states as fundamentals of, and it's not just one thing, but it's usually a whole load of combination of factors. Things like agency referrals, so the roads and motorway authorities are often a key sticking point, or the transport agency, or and just the lack of coordination across. I think that fundamentally there's also an overarching problem with planning is very static, and particularly in New South Wales we work very on a statutory basis of rules, and they are helpful in one way because they provide structure and often some level of certainty, but then they're very inflexible and they can't respond to changing things in like the way markets operate or different developments of types of retail or how people are living. And so, they take a long time to come up to speed, and it often takes a while for an application to be able to move through the system when they're very black and white barriers that they have to face.
Yeah. So do you think that process of coordination there might be an opportunity to automate that in future, and that could be, that hurdle can be jumped through technology?
I think there's unfortunately too much of a human element in that. You can create all the platforms in the world for, as soon as the DA is lodged, the other agencies are notified and it's all on an accessible online platform. You can create all those tools, but at the end of the day, it's probably going to come back to the people and the culture of those places and the political mandate to facilitate those type of outcomes.
Yeah, awesome. So moving into, I guess, some technical things. So Sydney's obviously got a growing population, so does Melbourne. And how do you, in the planning for a city, how do you cater for the growing populations?
This is a particularly topical point for Sydney at the moment. It's going to be the same in Melbourne, although Melbourne's different because you actually do have space to expand into, whereas Sydney is actually more geographically limited as to where you can expand. So I think at fundamental principles about planning that we should be looking to consolidate our urban footprint rather than continually expand, because when you look at infrastructure and the spend and the social impacts and all of those things that go with greenfield expansion, that our emphasis, all that science and research would speak to that density is actually the answer. And
has that changed? Because I think I used to hear that greenfields are probably a good way of developing, but is this like kind of a new kind of paradigm going higher?
The density is... I think, look, there's always different schools of thought that people are going to share about that. There's a really good book called Happy City by Charles Montgomery, and that book really, there's quite a lot of research in that around the benefits of density and as I say, the social impacts of looking at it, and that's at an American context, but the impacts of people spending time in cars and commuting and all of those things that are bigger than just what you see in a built form sense. So, but I think in in Australia more generally, like density has been on the agenda, and recognise that ultimately we probably can't deliver the amount of housing that we need to deliver just in increasing density or at the speed that it needs to happen. So it needs to happen in conjunction with greenfield development, but that our emphasis should be on density. What's interesting in New South Wales is that there is becoming more and more awareness about density and backlash in communities around the perception of increased density, which, at a political level is starting to now probably potentially get in the way of making the right planning decisions because of fear about the voter backlash that's coming against the need for density.
The what backlash, sorry?
The voter backlash.
Oh, the voter backlash.
Yeah, so if you take opinion polls, and we haven't had another state government election, but it's going to be at the forefront of it. And the Labor Party's identified in New South Wales that this is a key point of difference with what the Liberal government's been trying to do.
Yep.
And so if they run with that, then it could have quite a lot of planning policy implications, particularly around where we put our future homes.
So a lot of the communities against higher density. So what do they perceive as some of the problems with that?
As with all changes, usually the fear of the unknown. And so, it's very common. We'll work on major projects where people are objecting. And then as soon as the, retail's open, the cafe and the childcare centre, they're the ones that are actually in there using those facilities, and they weren't that bad after all. But it was that idea, there's big, towers coming to my neighbourhood and it's going to be different. Whereas if you put it on a greenfield area, it's not affecting anywhere that I can see, so I don't mind if people go out there. And so, it's usually that fear of the unknown. And look, the big and great... the Committee for Sydney put out a document which was really helpful in that idea of, and the Department of Planning's got on board with this in New South Wales as well, about it. Actually, it's about density done better. So, yes, density can be bad. It can have negative impacts on urban environments. So we're not just saying density everywhere anyway, but if we do it well, then there's the opportunities for it to really use the infrastructure that's there, build on amenity, all the good things that can come with it.
Cool. So if we're planning for more densities, what are some of the things we need to start designing better for? I can imagine infrastructure would be...
Yeah, look, I mean, that's the fundamental of, like, the public transport infrastructure needs to go with the density so that people can actually utilise... they're being in locations where they don't have to hop in cars and they're not relying on roads to be able to get around, and then looking at that density and also having the cross section of other infrastructure that goes with it, social infrastructure. And I'm talking not just we need childcare centres and community centres and libraries, but the things that actually, the way that people want to recreate, obviously parks and open space again are kind of planning 101, but often more and more so it's the infrastructure like retail the amenities that come from being cafes and restaurants and places that people actually want to go and spend time in. Yeah.
So there's obviously a lot of things that are uncertain, and you mentioned like infrastructure like retail, but then who knows what Amazon might do to retail, and then you got things like electric vehicles, and there's all these new things coming in. How do you plan for all these uncertainties that are probably coming in the next few decades?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it kind of speaks to my point before about the fact that we like things very black and white, and you can or you can't, and I know that's particularly bad in New South Wales. And how does that respond to when things evolve in the market, like retail changes in retailers, and when very often the controls say you must do this, and that's no longer actually how it works. So I think as planners we need to culturally change to think about being flexible, the way that we apply standards and the way that we work. And there's some structural issues in our legislation in New South Wales that dictate that makes it quite hard to respond to things as they evolve. But look, one of the observations we made when the latest Greater Sydney plan came out, and there's a lot of rhetoric in there about protecting employment lands, in particular around like key service areas, so that there are people like smash repairers are in locations where they're accessible to where people live, and they're not just forced everything out to Western Sydney. But we're also, the same document talks about driverless cars, and we're never not going to have any car accidents anymore. So on one hand, we're trying to protect smash repairers so that they have somewhere to go near us, and then on the other hand, we're all giving up our cars anyway. So and that's uncertain. We just don't know, and so it's a bit of an each-way bet. But we need to be able to respond quickly when we can see those changes are happening. Yeah, no, I can imagine. You mentioned a bit earlier how technology can help your process, and do you think like anything like virtual reality and stuff like that will help change the way we plan out how our city is going to look? Yeah, I think virtual reality or possibly more augmented reality have more... definitely have potential in the way that they can help us plan cities, help people understand what does density actually look like, because there's a lot of fear about, taking example, the difference between a 40 or a 50-story tower, when you're getting up to that height, most people don't look above awning height, podium level, but no one will ever be able, can't tell between a 40 and a 50-story building.
Yeah.
But the concern about someone or viewer perception about something can be completely different. So if we can give visual aids to help people understand what something looks like, then we're going a long way to dealing with one of the major barriers with planning and how we accommodate density and all those things, which is, the political and the public perception side of things.
Yeah, awesome. As we get toward the end, and a few general questions here, but what excites you the most about the future, the coming decades in the building industry?
I think that in New South Wales there's a more and more emphasis on design and getting quality in that, and I think that, and it's interesting because looking at Melbourne as a contrasting example, a lot of Melbourne's buildings externally, in terms of the new development that's happened, there's an emphasis, they've been quite beautiful externally, but they've had issues internally, and they've gone back and introduced guidelines modelled on New South Wales to try and improve the internal amenity of apartments. I think in New South Wales more generally, there's been an emphasis on that internal amenity, but now more thinking around the improving design holistically. And I think that ultimately is quite exciting, because the more investment and we value architecture and design, I think the richer the urban form we're going to get. Oh,
definitely. Yeah. And it's a double-edged sword. Who knows how long some of those, I'd say, like dog box apartments in Melbourne, they're probably not going to, stay up there the whole time. Who knows? Yeah, not the highest quality stuff. Another question that's subtly different. What do you think will have the biggest impact on the buildings industry in the future?
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of different things. Something that's been on my mind is as technology develops, and it's hard for us to picture this right now, but, if we move to a model of, Skype is still feels very disconnected, and people have that need to meet in a human level. But more we'll see in 10, 15, 20 years' time, the ability for us whether it's a VR headset and you put it on, you actually go to work in a virtual office space. Yeah. So you're looking eye to eye with whoever you're meeting with, but you're actually sitting at home rather than being in an office. And if that technology, and it will happen, it's going to happen, when that gets developed and we actually remove the need to move around in order to work with other people, then that's actually going to change the way that our cities work. And, the age of an office building and a tower in the city, it becomes kind of redundant to that business's needs, because people can be sitting at home. Yep. So are we going to actually, see complete adaptation and reuse of those type of buildings? And then are we going to change the way we design homes, because we're going to spend a lot more time there, and therefore it's important to have that kind of amenity on hand? So I think it could be a really interesting future as technology continues to change the way we relate to each other. Yeah,
I've never thought of that. That'd be incredible. The utilisation, I guess, of space would just go through the roof.
And then coming back to that need for transport infrastructure, if you actually don't have a dependency to move to a city area for work, then there's no reason you can't be in country New South Wales and doing the job, and that actually allows for a real decentralisation to occur and potentially changes some of the issues and demands we have on infrastructure.
I know there's actually on Iris, which is a virtual reality platform, quite recently their new update is you can actually do meetings in VR. So if you've got two people with a headset, you can both do the meeting, and already that eliminates the need to move from space to space. You can meet inside the BIM model or anything like that, and then discuss it from your desk.
Yeah, I mean that idea of having the model there to go and have a meeting with council through VR, and both putting on the headsets in different locations and walking around the virtual development site. I mean, that's obviously where it's going to head, and it's quite an exciting future.
Yeah, definitely. So if people want to find out more about yourself or Ethos Urban, where should they go?
Our website's probably the best place to start, which is just ethosurban.com. And we're based in Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney, so down the eastern seaboard. And we're heavily involved in trying to be at the forefront of thinking around these things and bringing that to the work that we do.
Yeah, phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey guys, Adam here. Just before you go, just one quick request. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review. It helps our rating and ranking on iTunes, so more people can hear from the people who are making our cities better places for our future.